I moved to Crestwood Pines on a Tuesday. The sun had just begun to dip behind the sycamores when the moving van pulled up. My 8-year-old twins, Ellie and Jack, darted out of the car before I'd even cut the ignition. They raced across the front lawn of our new home, whooping with the kind of untethered joy only children can muster. For the first time in a long while, I let myself believe we were going to be okay. After my wife passed 18 months ago, life had become a delicate balancing act between grief and duty. I'd taken a federal judgeship in a quieter district to give the kids stability and myself the breathing room to be both a father and a man who still believed in the law. Crestwood Pines had seemed ideal, quiet, clean, with streets that curved like a child's drawing and houses lined in pastels. Family-oriented, safe, serene, the sign at the entrance promised. That was before I met the homeowners association. Within a week, a notice arrived in our mailbox. It came in a white envelope embossed with gold trim, like an invitation to a wedding. Inside, a single sheet of paper warned us of a community violation. Ellie and Jack had drawn colorful chalk animals on the driveway. Apparently, dinosaurs and castles were considered visual disturbances. At first, I laughed. Then I tossed the notice into the recycling bin, assuming it was some bored retiree with a clipboard and too much time. I didn't know, yet, that it was the first move in a slow, deliberate war. The next citation accused us of leaving bikes near the sidewalk. The one after that said our trash bins had been visible for more than 30 minutes past collection. With each letter came a fine. $25, then $50, then $100. I paid them silently, not because they were fair, but because I didn't want my children growing up inside a conflict. But the notices kept coming. At the third HOA meeting, I introduced myself. My name is Michael Trent. I live on Maple Hollow Drive. Heads turned. One woman in the back whispered something to her neighbor. I caught a smirk pass between them. Seated at the front of the long table was a woman with a severe platinum bob, crisp beige suit, and fingers adorned with rings that clinked when she tapped them against her coffee cup. Karen Delacroix, she said, without rising. HOA president. Her tone was clipped, businesslike. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I remained calm. I'd like to understand the citations my family's received. Some seem arbitrary. Karen's fingers paused their tapping. The rules are published. You signed the covenant when you moved in. Yes, I replied evenly. But there's a difference between enforcing rules and targeting families. Karen leaned back. We take pride in the harmony of our community, Mr. Trent. Families who embrace structure thrive here. Others tend to cause disruption. Something in her tone made the room colder. A few heads nodded in agreement. Others avoided eye contact. I left the meeting with a folder of paperwork and the unmistakable sense that I'd just stepped into something rotten. That night, I sat at the kitchen table reviewing the HOA's bylaws. Some were reasonable, noise ordinances, landscaping requirements. But others were vague, to the point of absurdity. Visual clutter, child-related disturbances, excessive yard activity. They were written to be enforced at whim, and Karen wielded them like weapons. Ellie wandered in, rubbing her eyes. Daddy, are we in trouble? No, sweetheart, I said. We just have neighbors who need a reminder about kindness. The next morning, an envelope sat taped to our front door. A final warning. Inside, a grainy photo of Jack playing with a foam sword in the front yard. The letter accused me of allowing simulated violence within community view and claimed that repeated offenses could result in a referral to Child Protective Services. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about chalk or bikes anymore. This was personal. I folded the letter slowly, slid it into a file, and looked out the window at the rows of pristine lawns and smiling facades. They thought they were dealing with a grieving single father. They had no idea who I really was. And I wasn't going to let them take my family. The knock came on a Friday morning, sharp, insistent, and official. I opened the door to find two strangers on the porch. A man and a woman, both in business attire, both holding identification. Child Protective Services. The woman introduced herself with a practiced calm, while the man glanced past me, already scanning the living room. "Mr. Trent," the woman said, "we've received an anonymous report concerning the welfare of your children." My heart slammed against my ribs. "There are allegations," she continued, "of unsupervised outdoor activity, unsafe play conditions, emotional neglect, and verbal aggression within the home. We're here to investigate." I stared at them, stunned. "This is a mistake. I'm a federal judge. My children are healthy, safe, and loved." She gave a small, unreadable nod. "We understand, but procedure requires we assess the environment. May we come in?" I stepped aside. Jack and Ellie were at the table coloring, quiet and focused. They looked up, puzzled. "Who are they?" Ellie asked, crayon still in hand. "They're just checking on the house," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Why don't you finish your drawings upstairs?" The agents walked through every room, taking notes, asking questions. They examined the fridge, checked the bedrooms, asked the kids about their routines, their friends, their feelings. My twins answered honestly, innocently, without fear. But I could sense it already. The agents hadn't come to investigate, they'd come to confirm. After an hour, the man cleared his throat. "Mr. Trent, based on the report's detail and what we've seen here today, we're placing the children in temporary protective custody while the matter is reviewed." The floor dropped out from under me. "You're removing my children?" I said, voice low. "Based on what evidence? A fake report? Vague claims and sidewalk chalk." The woman softened her tone, but her words didn't change. "It's not an accusation. It's a precaution. You'll be able to attend a hearing to present your case." Jack's voice broke the silence. "Daddy." They didn't resist as the agents escorted them out. Ellie cried, clutching her drawing. Jack held my gaze with confused, terrified eyes. I didn't beg. I didn't shout. I watched them leave, my fists clenched so tight my nails drew blood from my palms. The second the car pulled away, I went to my office. I locked the door, pulled out the secure case at the back of my closet, and retrieved the credentials I hadn't used since I was sworn in 3 years ago: federal identification, judicial clearance, emergency legal access codes. I'd spent most of my career ensuring the law was used with care. But now someone had turned it into a weapon. The report filed against me wasn't written by an amateur. It cited specific legal language, named internal policies, and referenced prior cases, a deliberate attempt to make fiction look like fact. There was only one person in this community with both the motivation and the nerve to orchestrate something like this: Karen Delacroix. She had warned me, passive-aggressively but clearly, that my family didn't belong here. I thought she was petty. I thought she was small. But she was dangerous. I opened a new folder on my desktop, labeled it Crestwood Investigation, and began compiling. First, I reviewed every citation the HOA had issued since my arrival. The language, the timing, the escalation, it all formed a pattern. I wasn't just being fined. I was being targeted. Then I filed a FOIA request for all HOA communications mentioning my name. I knew I'd be denied initially, but it was the first move in a larger game. Meanwhile, I reached out to 2 colleagues, one in family court, one in housing discrimination law, and asked them to quietly look into the state licensing history of the HOA board. I didn't care about winning a war of words anymore. Karen had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. At 2:13 a.m., I finished drafting a preliminary complaint for filing in federal court. A civil suit, defamation, emotional distress, malicious prosecution, abuse of process. The document was just the start. I'd build a case brick by brick. I would dismantle the house she'd built on arrogance and cruelty. I looked at the photos on my desk. Ellie and Jack at the beach last summer, covered in sand, beaming. They were the reason I'd walked away from higher courts and the political chessboard of Washington, D.C. Now, they were the reason I was returning to the fight. Karen thought she'd intimidated a single father into silence. She had no idea she'd just challenged a federal judge to battle. The hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning, held in a sterile municipal building 2 towns over. The room smelled of bleach and bureaucracy. I arrived early, dressed in a charcoal gray suit and the weight of quiet fury. A court-appointed guardian stood in the hallway with my children, Jack fidgeting with a loose thread on his sweater, Ellie clutching a teddy bear she hadn't slept without since she was 3. They didn't rush to me. They studied my face first, searching for signs. I gave them the calm smile I always wore in court. We're going home soon. Inside, the CPS attorney began with procedural language, reading through the concerns like they were etched in stone. My children were exposed to elevated emotional environments, they claimed. Allowed unsupervised outdoor activity with simulated combat, and subject to parental withdrawal and volatility. The judge, a young, wary man still fresh in his robes, looked at me with polite neutrality. I stood when it was my turn. I am Michael Trent, I said, voice even. A sitting federal judge with 12 years on the bench and an unblemished professional record. My wife died of breast cancer less than 2 years ago. My children and I moved to Crestwood Pines to heal. Instead, we were targeted by an HOA that abuses its authority under the guise of community standards. The judge shifted, listening more intently now. I handed over the first of several exhibits. Photos of my children, smiling and safe, character references from former colleagues, teachers, and friends, and finally, a dossier of the HOA's fines, citations, and correspondence. Every single incident that led to this CPS investigation was documented by a private citizen with no training, no mandate, and a history of personal grievances. The report itself was drafted using language lifted directly from legal templates. This wasn't a concerned neighbor, it was a calculated smear campaign. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have evidence of who submitted the report? I placed one more page on the table. Yes, Your Honor. This is an internal email from the HOA's board president, Karen Delacroix, sent 2 days before CPS arrived at my door. It was leaked by a whistleblower I'm protecting under judicial privilege. The email reads, "He may think he's above the rules, but let's see how smug he is when the state takes a closer look at his home life." The courtroom fell silent. The CPS attorney looked pale. The judge dismissed the case on the spot and signed an immediate order returning my children to my custody. I held Jack and Ellie close outside the courtroom, whispering promises I would never again allow someone to come between us. But it wasn't over. I didn't want a clean break. I wanted accountability. The next day, I filed the federal lawsuit. My name was on the plaintiff line, but it was bigger than me. The filing named Karen Delacroix and 3 HOA board members in their personal capacity. Charges included malicious prosecution, defamation, abuse of power, and civil rights violations. Within 48 hours, the local paper picked up the story. By the end of the week, it had spread to state news networks. Karen called an emergency HOA meeting. Residents flooded the community center, angry, confused, some shocked to realize the woman they trusted had weaponized neighborhood bylaws against a grieving family. I arrived just as the meeting began. I didn't walk to the podium. I simply sat in the back row and waited. Karen's voice trembled as she tried to explain the misunderstanding. But residents had read the leaked email. They'd seen the lawsuit, and they were no longer afraid. "I voted for you because you said you'd bring order," one father shouted. "Not terrorize kids with chalk drawings." An older woman in the second row stood. "You always talked about protecting the neighborhood, but you were protecting your control." Karen's composure cracked. When she spotted me in the back, her eyes narrowed, but the fire had gone out of them. The room had turned. The illusion of power had been shattered. Later that night, an anonymous source forwarded me internal HOA communications, threads revealing years of petty fines, selective enforcement, and veiled threats to silence dissenters. Crestwood wasn't the haven it pretended to be, but it could be. The board resigned en masse the following week. A special election was announced. Karen vanished from public view. And I knew, as I stood again on my driveway with Jack and Ellie drawing smiling dragons in pink and green chalk, that we weren't just safe. We were free. 3 months later, Crestwood Pines was no longer the place I'd moved into. It had become something new. Sidewalks, once monitored with military precision, now brimmed with hopscotch games and garden gnomes. Lawns were no longer judged by blade length, but by laughter echoing across driveways. And the house that had once been too colorful for community guidelines was now the first one newcomers complimented. But the final chapter still loomed. The federal case against Karen Delacroix and the former HOA board proceeded with the momentum of a freight train. Depositions revealed a years-long pattern of discriminatory practices, fines levied disproportionately against single parents, veterans, immigrants. Karen had referred to it as subtle shaping of community standards in one email. The judge, an old colleague of mine from circuit court, knew better. Karen's defense crumbled in discovery. One by one, the board members folded, agreeing to testify in exchange for reduced penalties. They painted her as a despot in pearls, ruling over the neighborhood like a petty tyrant with too much time and too little empathy. In court, she tried to shift the narrative. "I only wanted to uphold the standards," she told the jury, her voice brittle. "He challenged everything. He made people uncomfortable." "You mean he made you accountable?" my attorney countered. "I didn't speak during the trial. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself: emails, surveillance footage, tampered citations, and that forged CPS report." The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all civil counts. Karen was ordered to pay $750,000 in damages, most of which I pledged to reinvest into community improvement grants for the residents she'd targeted. The state's Bar Association also opened an ethics inquiry into her past business dealings. Her real estate license was revoked. The morning after the verdict, I received a handwritten letter slid under my door. "Mr. Trent, you didn't just win. You reminded us what justice looks like. For years, I stayed quiet because I thought speaking up wouldn't matter. I was wrong. Thank you. A neighbor who won't be silent again." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk beside Jack's dragon drawing and Ellie's teddy bear keychain. Weeks passed. The media moved on. Karen moved out. But something stayed with me, a question that had nagged since the moment I saw that CPS van drive away with my children. How many others had lost something they couldn't get back? One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I called Jack and Ellie into the living room. I showed them the community grant application we'd created together: simple, straightforward, open to all. Jack read the first line aloud. "This is for anyone who's been silenced, fined unfairly, or made to feel like they don't belong." Ellie smiled. "So they can draw dragons too?" "Exactly," I said. "So they know this place belongs to them too." We received over 50 applications in the first week, requests for a community library, a sensory playground, a pollinator garden, and even a mural wall where kids could paint freely. And every weekend, more neighbors joined in. The HOA, now restructured with elected volunteers and open meetings, welcomed residents from every background. Enforcement became transparent. Fines required community approval. The power Karen once hoarded now belonged to the people she tried to control. A new family moved into Karen's old house, a single mother of 3, one child in a wheelchair. I stopped by with homemade cookies and introduced myself. "I heard this neighborhood used to be strict," she said nervously. I smiled. "Not anymore." And it wasn't. Crestwood wasn't perfect. No place ever is. But now it was a place where power wasn't abused in the shadows, where families weren't afraid of retaliation, and where justice wasn't just an idea, it was a lived experience. Jack and Ellie had started calling our house the fortress, not because it kept people out, but because it reminded them they were safe inside. We planted flowers along the walkway, each color chosen by the kids. Purple for courage, yellow for kindness, red for truth. On the anniversary of our arrival in Crestwood Pines, I stood on the porch and watched my children run down the street to join their friends. No more cold stares from neighbors. No more chalk scraped from concrete. Just laughter, light, and the quiet triumph of freedom reclaimed. Karen tried to take my children. Instead, she gave them a community worth fighting for.